So David has left the ark with Obed-Edom, and Obed-Edom is being blessed by the presence of the Lord in the ark, the place where the Lord would dwell, between the cherubim. And so we get to verse 12 of chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, and it says, "Now it was told King David, saying, The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him on account of the ark of God. And David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness." And so it was. They're happy again, transporting the ark, bringing it in. It's like, yes, it's happening. So it was that when the bearers of the ark, you notice that? They don't make a big deal of here, but it says, when the bearers of the ark. What's happening here that didn't happen before is that the ark is being transported in the proper way. There's priests bearing the ark. They're carrying it. It's not on a new cart. Even though, nice. Make a new cart for the Lord. That's nice. That's sacrificial. But that's not what he said. And so it says, so it was, verse 13, that when the bearers of the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. And David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David wasn't wearing a whole lot. He had a linen, kind of basically a sheet over him, and he's dancing before the Lord. This guy's happy. I mean, this is the greatest thing, to bring the presence of the Lord back to Israel. The presence has been blessing Obed-Edom's house, and he's just expecting it to be a blessing as he gets it in to Israel. So to his house. So verse 15, so David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of the trumpet. Then it happened, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Well, this is David's wife, and she looks out and sees David dancing around, and in this linen ephod, and she's pretty disgusted with him, and she despises him, it says, in her heart. So verse 17, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent which David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. So David had pitched a little tent in his yard to bring the ark so it could stay at his house. But his wife had seen him dancing around. He was so happy, and she's despised him. So we get to verse 18. And I'm taking a little time in chapter 6 because this is kind of a pivotal chapter. This is when the presence of God comes into Israel. David's reign really begins to go full force. There's a few years here, probably David's best time as king. And it changes pretty rapidly. We get about 5 chapters of good time, and then all of a sudden we've got trouble again. But here we've got this happening. So I'm emphasizing a little bit here in chapter 6. In verse 18 it says, and when David had finished offering the burnt offering and the peace offering, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. 19. Further, he distributed to all the people, to all the multitude of Israel, both to men and women, a cake of bread, and one of dates, and one of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. So here there's like a food distribution going on, celebration. It's like everything's free. This is like, come celebrate with us. The presence of God is back, and they're giving away food. Verse 20, but when David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, oh, how the king of Israel distinguished himself today. He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants' maids, as one of the foolish ones shamelessly uncovers himself. So she's just rebuking him about his display of dancing with not a whole lot of clothes on, I guess, because he had this sheet or this linen ephod. Verse 21, so David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will celebrate before the Lord. Here's a pretty stinging response to this rebuke. The Lord chose me over your father. Wow, okay, and it's true. And he says, maybe it's because of this, really. I mean, you get the implication in there. Maybe it's because I'm willing to dance before the Lord and celebrate before him. Maybe that's why I was chosen. And so verse 22, and it will be more lightly esteemed than this, and will be humbled in my own eyes, but with the maids of whom you have spoken, with them I will be distinguished. So he's just saying his honor is still intact, because what he was doing, he was celebrating before the Lord. Have you ever done that? It's kind of nice. I walked in the sanctuary, a couple months ago, and a song was playing, and I would dance 1,000 miles, or I would walk 1,000 miles for and everybody's dancing now. And I just had this spontaneity where I just grabbed hold of my granddaughter and started dancing around with her. And I walked down the aisle a little farther and ran into a high school girl, Allie, and started dancing with her. And it just was spontaneous joy at the time. And that's a wonderful place to be. I see why David would be like, what are you interfering with my worship for? I mean, I was really having a time before the Lord. And here, verse 23 is a really sad verse. It says, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. It's like her bitterness over this issue of somebody else rejoicing before the Lord, of her husband rejoicing before the Lord, seems to have shut her womb. That seems to be the implication of this verse. So, are there complications? There can be, very much so, for our actions and things that we don't even know. So I would just say chapters 6 through 10 in 2 Samuel are the height of David's kingdom. Be good to read through there and read that. We're going to look a little bit at some of these as we go along. Chapter 7, in fact, it says, verse 1, now it came about when the king lived in his house, and the Lord had given him rest on every side from all of his enemies, that the king said to Nathan the prophet, see, now I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells within tent curtains. So now the tent that he'd set up for the ark's not good enough. He said, I got to build a house. I got a nice house. Let's give God a nice house. And it says here that Nathan said to the king, go do all that's in your mind, for the Lord is with you. But it came about in the same night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and say to my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one who should build me a house to dwell in? For I have not dwelled in a house since the day I brought up the sons of Israel from Egypt, even to this day. And he goes on and says, he basically tells David, I made a mistake. Nathan says, I told you to go do whatever was in your mind. He says, well, the Lord just spoke to me and said, no, you're not to build it, your son's to build it. And there's a literal fulfillment in this, in that his son Solomon does build the temple for the Lord. But of course, the son of David that comes many years later, the Messiah, son of David, is the one who builds the spiritual house. That's an eternal dwelling place for the Lord, which is his people. And so Nathan gives the word of the Lord and an eternal promise then. He says, you're not to build a house, but he gives an incredible promise that starts, I'm going to read verse 12. It says, when your days, this is speaking to David, Nathan the prophet, when your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant or your seed after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Wow, what a promise that he gives here. And I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. So he's talking about his natural son Solomon there. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. So his loving kindness will not depart from him like he did when he took it away from Saul. So God's loving kindness is going to be towards this son. Now it won't be like Saul. It won't be taken away. And in verse 16 it says, and your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and all this vision, so Nathan spoke to David. So David is just totally overwhelmed here. And we'll see his response in the next session. But what we're seeing here is Nathan has this word, and we got to understand this. Nathan spoke out of the goodness of his heart when he first said, go do whatever's in your mind. Well, like a lot of us will do, so yeah, that's a good idea. Go build a house. Then the word of the Lord, and it wasn't really a rebuke, it was just, no, it's not appointed for David to do this. And so Nathan comes back with the actual word of the Lord. God's got a plan of what he wants to happen here. And it's going to be his son, David's son, who will build this house. And David's got the promise that on that throne, in this place, he'll have someone that's going to be on the throne of Israel forever. David will, a descendant of his. Well, that's not going to be Solomon, but it'll be that greater son of David that comes, that we find in the New Testament, who we call Jesus.